I'm Eleanor, 67, and the proudest day of my life should have been watching my son Jason marry his beautiful bride Rachel. After years of struggle as a single mom, I'd finally seen him grow into a successful man. But when he took the microphone for his toast, my world shattered. "This woman raised me," he said, gesturing toward me. "But don't become her. She's the reason I needed therapy." The room froze. With trembling hands, I stood up and reached for the microphone. Before I continue this painful story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and join our community of real-life family stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles. Frank and I met when I was 23, working as a secretary at the accounting firm where he'd just been hired. He was charming, ambitious, and had the kind of smile that made my heart skip. Our courtship was a whirlwind: dinner dates at restaurants I could never afford on my salary, weekend trips to the coast, and promises of a beautiful life together. Within a year, we were married in a modest ceremony with our closest friends and family in attendance. The first year was blissful. We bought a small starter home in a nice neighborhood with good schools, planning ahead for the family we both wanted. Frank's career was taking off, and I supported him every step of the way, handling all household responsibilities so he could focus on work. I didn't mind, that's what wives did in those days. The changes were subtle at first. Frank started criticizing little things. My cooking wasn't quite right, the house wasn't clean enough, I'd bought the wrong brand at the grocery store. I brushed it off as work stress. Then came the monitoring of our finances, questioning every purchase I made. Even though I was always careful with money, he insisted I account for every dollar spent. The emotional distance grew as his control tightened. When I discovered I was pregnant with Jason, there was a brief return to happiness. Frank seemed excited, painted the nursery himself, and for a few months I had my loving husband back. Jason was born on a snowy February morning in 1985. I still remember Frank's face when he first held our son, a mixture of pride and terror that I found endearing at the time. The joy was short-lived. Frank's drinking, which had always been present but manageable, escalated. He'd come home late, sometimes not until the next morning, leaving me alone with a colicky baby. When I confronted him, the arguments turned ugly. He never hit me, but his words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. I was worthless, a bad mother, lucky he kept a roof over our heads. By Jason's third birthday, Frank was a stranger in our home. By his fifth, he was spending most nights on the couch. When Jason turned 8, Frank didn't even come home for his birthday dinner. Instead, he called to say he'd had enough and wouldn't be coming back. 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. He'd emptied our joint account, leaving just enough to cover 1 month's mortgage. The world I'd carefully built collapsed overnight. I had no career to fall back on, having been a homemaker since marriage. My parents were deceased, and Frank's family blamed me for the divorce. At 34, I was alone with a heartbroken 8-year-old boy and mounting bills. I took any work I could find: receptionist at a dental office during the day and waitressing at night. My neighbor Marge, a retired widow, agreed to check on Jason after school until I could get home. On nights I worked late, he'd be asleep when I got home, and I'd kiss his forehead, promising myself that somehow I'd make things better. We had to move from our home to a 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable school district. I fought to keep Jason in his original school, driving him across town each morning before work. The guilt was crushing when he had to come home to an empty apartment, heat up his own dinner, and put himself to bed on my late shifts. But what choice did I have? Christmas that first year was particularly hard. I couldn't afford the video game system Jason wanted, the one Frank had promised him before leaving. I worked extra shifts to buy him a used bicycle instead. He tried to hide his disappointment, which somehow hurt worse than if he'd thrown a tantrum. I remember one night finding him crying over a school assignment. "Draw your family." He'd drawn himself standing alone between 2 houses far apart. When I asked where I was, he pointed to the smaller house and said, "You're there, but you're always working." The shame of that moment haunts me still. By Jason's 12th birthday, we had established a routine. I'd managed to secure a better-paying administrative position that allowed me to be home most evenings. We'd moved to a slightly better apartment, and Jason had made friends in our new neighborhood. But the damage had been done. Where once he'd been an open, talkative child, he'd become quieter, more reserved. When he did speak up, especially as he entered his teens, it was often with a sharp tone that reminded me painfully of Frank. Frank's child support checks came sporadically at first, then stopped entirely when he moved out of state and remarried. I never told Jason that his father had another family now. He discovered it himself through social media years later. The betrayal added another layer to the wall growing between us. Despite everything, Jason was a good student. I clung to that, perhaps too much. His academic success became my proof that I hadn't failed completely as a mother. I pushed him hard, perhaps harder than I should have. But in my mind, education was his ticket to a better life than I could provide. His protection against ending up in a situation like mine. What I didn't realize then was how my fear was shaping my parenting. Every decision I made came from a place of terror. Terror that without strict guidance, Jason would make mistakes that would derail his future. Terror that without my constant vigilance, something would go wrong. Terror that he would end up like his father. Or worse, with someone like his father. What I saw as protection, Jason experienced as control. This fundamental misunderstanding would grow between us like a silent chasm, widening with each passing year. Jason had always been a bright child with an innate curiosity about the world. Before Frank left, he would spend hours building elaborate structures with his Legos, or telling me fantastical stories he'd created. He had his father's creativity but a gentleness Frank had long since buried. After the divorce, though, that sparkle dimmed. He retreated into books and later video games, worlds he could control when his real life felt so unstable. I established firm rules out of necessity. With no one to back me up, consistency seemed the only way to maintain order in our disrupted lives. Jason had to maintain at least AB average. He had a strict 8 p.m. curfew on school nights, 10 p.m. on weekends until he turned 16. I checked his homework every night until high school. Television was limited to 1 hour daily, and friends who came over were scrutinized. I needed to know where he was at all times. "Mom, Tommy's mom lets him stay out until midnight," he'd complain. "I'm not Tommy's mom," became my standard reply. "And Tommy's mom has a husband to help her if something goes wrong." I remember one particular fight when he was 14. He wanted to go to a concert with friends, but it was on a school night and 45 minutes away. "Everyone's going, Mom. Mark's older brother is driving us." "Mark's brother who got a DUI last year?" "Absolutely not. That was months ago. You never let me do anything." "I'm trying to keep you safe, Jason. When you're a parent, you'll understand." His response cut me to the quick. If being a parent means making someone miserable, I'm never having kids. He stormed to his room and didn't speak to me for 3 days. I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion, but deep down I recognized the growing resentment. Still, I couldn't bring myself to loosen the reins. The world seemed too dangerous and he was all I had. Despite our conflicts, Jason excelled academically. By junior year, he was on the honor roll, editor of the school newspaper, and being scouted by prestigious universities. I was so proud of him but also terrified of him leaving. College would mean losing daily contact with the center of my world. When Jason mentioned wanting to study creative writing, I immediately discouraged it. "Writers don't make money, honey. Your father had creative dreams too, and look where that left us. Business or pre-law would give you security." "It's my life, Mom," he argued, but eventually capitulated. He applied to business programs at my insistence, but I later discovered he'd been sneaking into creative writing classes throughout college. When I found out during his sophomore year, I felt betrayed, though I recognize now it was his small act of self-preservation. During those college years, our relationship grew increasingly strained. His visits home became shorter and less frequent. Our phone calls followed a script. Yes, classes were fine. Yes, he was eating properly. No, he wasn't partying too much. The emotional connection between us withered while I pretended not to notice. It was during his senior year that he mentioned Rachel for the first time. "She's in my marketing ethics class. She sees things differently. Makes me think." I heard the animation in his voice when he spoke about her, something I hadn't heard in years. When they'd been dating 6 months, he brought her home for Thanksgiving. Rachel was pretty, polished, and came from a wealthy family. She was studying business too, but planned to work for nonprofits. She was unfailingly polite to me, but I sensed her analyzing our relationship, noticing the tension Jason tried to hide. "Your mom seems nice," I overheard her say when they thought I was in the kitchen. "She means well," was Jason's careful reply. "It's complicated." Rachel made an effort with me, asking about my job, complimenting my cooking, inquiring about family recipes. I tried to reciprocate, but found myself subtly competing for Jason's attention, interrupting their conversations with reminders about his childhood, bringing up inside jokes that excluded her. I see now how transparent my insecurity must have been. When they announced their engagement 2 years after graduation, I felt genuinely happy for Jason, but also a sense of loss. Rachel's parents, Harold and Diana, were hosting an engagement dinner. Their home was magnificent, a colonial with manicured grounds and a view of the lake. Diana greeted me warmly, but with the confidence of a woman who had never questioned her place in the world. During dinner, I watched Jason with his future in-laws. He laughed easily with Harold, accepted Diana's affectionate touches without stiffening. He was relaxed in a way he never was with me anymore. When Rachel's father toasted to the joining of our families, Jason's eyes met mine briefly before sliding away. In that moment, I realized he'd found the family stability he'd always craved, just not with me. I drove home alone that night, past the apartment building where we'd lived during those difficult years, wondering when exactly I'd lost my son's heart while keeping his body safe and his future secure. I didn't know then that this question would be answered in the most public and painful way possible. Wedding planning began almost immediately after the engagement. Rachel's parents offered to cover most expenses, a gift to the young couple. Diana explained during our first planning lunch. I insisted on contributing what I could, though my savings were modest compared to their resources. "I could handle the rehearsal dinner," I suggested, calculating how many extra hours I'd need to work to afford even a simple gathering. "Oh, we've already reserved the country club dining room," Diana replied. "But perhaps you could help with the wedding favors?" Every suggestion I made seemed to have been anticipated and handled already. The venue would be the botanical gardens where Diana sat on the board. The caterer was a renowned chef who had prepared meals for the governor. Rachel's dress would be custom designed. I tried to insert myself where I could. Jason always loved my chocolate cake. Maybe instead of a traditional wedding cake. The pastry chef is creating a 5-tier vanilla bean cake with handpipe details to match Rachel's dress, Diana explained gently. "But we could certainly serve your chocolate cake at the bridal shower." My cake never made an appearance at any wedding event. As the months passed, I found myself increasingly sidelined. When I mentioned family traditions I thought Jason might want to incorporate, he'd exchange glances with Rachel before explaining they were going for something more contemporary. I didn't recognize it then, but I was responding by becoming more controlling about the few aspects where my opinion was still solicited. I had strong views about the seating chart, Jason's tuxedo choice, even the wording on the programs. In retrospect, I was desperately trying to maintain some connection to this milestone event that was slipping through my fingers. 3 months before the wedding, tensions finally boiled over. We were discussing the ceremony when I mentioned the handkerchief my grandmother had carried at her wedding. "I thought Rachel might like to carry it as her something old," I explained, carefully unwrapping the delicate linen from tissue paper. "Mom, Rachel's carrying her great-grandmother's rosary wrapped around her bouquet," Jason said. "Well, maybe you could keep it in your pocket then," I persisted. "It's been in our family for generations." "I don't think it goes with the aesthetic we're creating," Rachel said carefully. "Aesthetic? This isn't about aesthetics. This is about family and tradition and remembering where you come from." My voice had risen more than I intended. "That's rich coming from you," Jason muttered. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you only care about family history when it's convenient for you. You barely even talk about Dad. You've erased half my history my entire life. I was protecting you. No, you were controlling me. Just like you're trying to control aspects of our wedding because you can't stand not being in charge. You've always had to micromanage everything about my life." The room fell silent. Rachel touched Jason's arm, whispering something in his ear. "I think we need a break," he finally said. We'll handle the rest of the details ourselves. For 3 weeks, Jason didn't answer my calls. When he finally did, it was with carefully measured politeness. We never discussed the argument. The wedding planning continued without me, with information shared via formal emails that included Rachel's parents and the wedding planner. I was being treated as just another guest. The rehearsal dinner was elegant and impersonal. I sat at a table with distant relatives while Jason and Rachel circulated. Harold gave a heartfelt speech about welcoming Jason to their family, how he'd always wanted a son. I watched Jason blink back tears, accepting Harold's embrace with genuine emotion. Diana squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture of sympathy that somehow made everything worse. That night in my hotel room, I took out old photos of Jason as a child. His gap-toothed smile when he lost his first tooth. The Halloween I stayed up all night making his astronaut costume. His middle school graduation where he'd hugged me spontaneously after receiving his certificate. Where had that boy gone? Had I really been such a terrible mother that he now saw me as nothing but an obstacle to overcome? The morning of the wedding, I went to Jason's suite as arranged. He was alone, struggling with his cufflinks. "Let me help," I offered. As I fastened them, I tried to bridge the gulf between us. "I'm so proud of the man you've become, Jason. I know things haven't always been easy between us, but I want you to know that everything I've ever done was because I love you." He met my eyes in the mirror. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the connection we once shared. Then he simply said, "Thanks, Mom," and turned away to check his phone. I kissed his cheek and left, wondering if I'd ever find my way back to my son's heart, not knowing that in just a few hours, the distance between us would be laid bare for everyone to witness. The ceremony was everything Diana had promised: tasteful, elegant, and picture-perfect. Rows of white chairs on manicured lawns, an arbor dripping with roses and ivy, a string quartet playing softly as guests were seated. I wore a blue silk dress I'd splurged on, wanting to look my best for the photographs that would commemorate this day. When the music changed and Rachel appeared on her father's arm, I glanced at Jason. The naked adoration on his face brought tears to my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at anything with such open emotion. Rachel was radiant in her custom gown, floating down the aisle like something from a fairy tale. Harold placed her hand in Jason's with a formal dignity that somehow emphasized what Frank had missed by walking away from fatherhood. I watched through a blur of tears as they exchanged vows. In good times and bad, they promised each other. I thought of all the bad times Jason and I had weathered together, and the good times too that seemed so distant now. When they were pronounced husband and wife, everyone applauded. I noticed Diana dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief not unlike the one Jason had rejected. At the reception, I was seated at the family table, but at the opposite end from Jason and Rachel. Harold and Diana flanked the newlyweds, while I sat beside Rachel's grandmother and aunt. The elderly woman patted my hand. "The mother of the groom always feels a bit left out, dear. When my son married, I cried for a week. The meal was exquisite, but I barely tasted it." I kept watching Jason, how effortlessly he charmed Rachel's relatives, how he leaned in when Diana spoke to him, laughing at something she said. He belonged with them in a way he no longer seemed to with me. After dinner came the toasts. Harold spoke first. Eloquent words about marriage being a partnership, and his confidence that Jason and Rachel would face life's challenges together. The best man followed with amusing anecdotes about Jason in college. Then Rachel's maid of honor shared sweet memories of their friendship. Finally, Jason stood and took the microphone. The room quieted. He looked handsome and assured in his tuxedo, every inch the successful young businessman. "I want to thank everyone for sharing this day with us," he began. "Rachel, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You've shown me what a healthy relationship looks like, and I promise to spend my life trying to be worthy of your love." The guests murmured appreciatively. Jason turned slightly, his eyes finding me. "I also want to say something about my mother, Eleanor." I smiled encouragingly, expecting the usual platitudes about a mother's love. "Mom raised me by herself after my father left. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. She made sure I had opportunities in education." My heart swelled with vindication. He did appreciate the sacrifices. But there's something else everyone should know. His voice shifted, took on an edge I recognized from our worst arguments. Behind closed doors there was a price for everything she did. Every sacrifice came with strings attached. Every opportunity came with control. The room grew still. I felt blood rushing to my face. For years I've been working through the damage of growing up with a mother who used guilt as a weapon, who monitored my every move, who made me responsible for her happiness. Rachel has helped me understand that what I experienced wasn't normal or healthy. I couldn't breathe. People were glancing at me now, expressions ranging from shock to pity. So while I thank my mother for the sacrifices she made, I want to say this to my wife. He turned to Rachel, whose face had gone pale. This woman raised me, but don't become her. She's the reason I needed therapy. The silence was absolute. Someone's glass clinked against a plate, the sound jarringly loud in the hush. I sat frozen, a grotesque smile still plastered on my face, as hundreds of eyes flickered between Jason and me. Rachel was staring at her plate. Her mother looked horrified. Harold was frantically signaling to the band. In that moment, I felt something inside me break and reform. The humiliation was searing, but beneath it rose a strange clarity. Years of misunderstandings, resentments, and fears crystallized into perfect understanding. I saw us both clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as villain and victim, but as two people who had hurt each other while trying to survive. The moment stretched unbearably. Then, before the band could start playing or the best man could intervene, I stood up. My legs felt wooden as I walked to where Jason stood, his expression already shifting from righteous anger to uncertainty. I held out my hand for the microphone. After a moment's hesitation, he gave it to me. The microphone felt heavy in my hand. Hundreds of eyes watched me, some curious, others embarrassed, a few gleaming with the sick excitement people feel witnessing a public disaster. My mind raced through possible responses, walking out in dignified silence, breaking down in tears, defending myself vehemently. None felt right. In those few seconds, memories flashed through my mind. Jason at 10, refusing to join the baseball team though I'd already paid the registration fee. But I hate baseball, Mom. My insistence that he needed team activities for college applications. Jason at 16, wanting to attend a writing workshop over summer instead of the business internship I'd arranged. This is about your future, Jason. His resigned compliance. Jason at 20, changing his major without telling me. The hurt in his eyes when I discovered the deception. You just don't trust me to make my own decisions. I saw the pattern now, how my fear had masqueraded as protection. How my love, though genuine, had become entangled with control. There was truth in Jason's accusations. Not the whole truth, but enough that I couldn't simply dismiss them. I took a deep breath and raised the microphone. My voice emerged steadier than I expected. First, I want to congratulate Jason and Rachel. This should be a day of joy, and I won't take that from you. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Jason is right about many things. I did work multiple jobs. I did sacrifice. But he's also right that I held on too tight. The room remained deathly quiet. Jason's expression had shifted from defiance to wariness. What Jason doesn't know, what no child can know until they become a parent themselves, is this. Motherhood broke me open and rebuilt me around one central truth. I would die for my child without hesitation, but I had to live for him instead, which was infinitely harder. I looked directly at Jason now. I made mistakes. Many of them. I controlled when I should have guided. I directed when I should have listened. I protected when I should have allowed you to fall. For that I am truly sorry. His eyes widened slightly. But here's what I want everyone in this room to understand. I continued, my voice gaining strength. There is no perfect parent. There is no roadmap. There is only love and fear and doing your best with the tools you have. So yes, I was controlling. Yes, I made you feel suffocated at times. But before you warn your bride not to become me, remember this. You are standing here today educated, successful, and whole enough to form a loving relationship, not despite me, but partly because of me. And that is what parenting is. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked or uncomfortable, but contemplative. Jason stared at me, his expression unreadable. Rachel had tears in her eyes. From the corner of my eye, I saw Diana nodding slightly. I handed the microphone to the best man. "Please enjoy the rest of your evening," I said to the room at large, then walked with measured steps toward the exit. I wouldn't let them see me crumble. In the hallway outside the ballroom, I leaned against the wall, suddenly lightheaded. A server passing by asked if I needed assistance. "Just need some air," I managed to say, making my way toward a small balcony overlooking the gardens. Outside, the evening air cooled my flushed face. I heard the doors open behind me and tensed, preparing for confrontation, but it was Rachel's grandmother who joined me. "That took courage," she said, standing beside me at the railing. "Or foolishness," I replied. "Perhaps both. Mothers and sons." She shook her head. "Such complicated relationships. My Harold barely spoke to me for 3 years after a disagreement when he was in college. Now he calls me twice a week. Jason and I may be beyond repair." "Nothing between parent and child is ever beyond repair while both still draw breath," she said firmly. "But repair doesn't mean returning to what was. It means building something new from the broken pieces." We stood in companionable silence for a few minutes. Inside, I could hear the band playing again, the party continuing. "Will you go back in?" she asked. I shook my head. "I think I've given them enough to talk about for one evening. Please make my excuses if anyone asks." She squeezed my hand before returning inside. I remained on the balcony until I was certain I could walk to my car without breaking down. The valet gave me a sympathetic look as he handed over my keys. Word had obviously spread about the scene inside. Driving away from my son's wedding reception, I felt hollowed out yet somehow lighter. The worst had happened. My failures as a mother had been announced to a room full of people. And I had survived. More than survived, I had spoken my truth. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same resilience that had carried me through raising a child alone. But first, I needed to go home and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The drive home from the wedding venue took 40 minutes, but I have little memory of it. My body operated on autopilot while my mind replayed the evening's events on endless loop. Jason's cutting words, the shocked faces of the guests, my response, the aftermath. By the time I pulled into my driveway, exhaustion had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Inside my small house, the one I'd finally been able to buy 5 years ago after decades of renting, I kicked off my heels and unzipped the expensive dress that had seemed so important just hours before. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. An aging woman with smeared makeup and eyes full of pain. "Well, Eleanor," I said aloud to my reflection, "you've really done it now." Sleep was impossible. I made tea and carried it to my small home office, where a bookshelf held photo albums chronicling Jason's childhood. I pulled one down at random. Jason at 12, the summer we'd finally had enough money for a proper vacation. We'd gone to a beach 3 hours away, staying in a modest motel but splurging on parasailing and a dolphin-watching tour. There was a photo of him building an elaborate sand castle, his face intent with concentration. I remembered hovering nearby, warning him repeatedly about sunburn though he'd been thoroughly slathered with sunscreen. When other children asked if he could join their volleyball game, I'd insisted he finish his castle first, worried about him playing with strangers. He'd complied but watched the game longingly until the other kids stopped asking. Another album showed his high school years. Jason receiving academic awards, Jason in his graduation gown. In nearly every photo, his smile seemed practiced rather than genuine. There were few pictures with friends. Had I discouraged those friendships without realizing it? Had my insistence on academic excellence come at the cost of normal teenage experiences? The sun was rising when I finally confronted the hardest question. Was Jason right? Had he truly needed therapy because of me? The thought pierced me with fresh pain. No mother wants to believe she's damaged her child. I'd always told myself that everything I did was for Jason's benefit, to give him the best possible chance at life. But good intentions don't negate harmful impacts. Looking back with new awareness, I could see how my anxiety had manifested as control, how my fear of failing him had led me to micromanage his life, how my need for his success had burdened him with expectations no child should carry. That first day after the wedding passed in a fog. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. No messages came from Jason or Rachel. I hadn't really expected any, but each hour of silence reinforced the finality of the rupture between us. Several friends called after hearing about the incident. News travels fast, especially bad news, but I let their calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to discuss what had happened with anyone. By the second day, numbness gave way to anger. How dare Jason humiliate me so publicly? After everything I'd sacrificed, didn't I deserve basic respect? I'd given up my youth, my chances at remarriage, my career advancement, all to ensure he had opportunities one never had. And this was my repayment? A public denouncement on what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives? I spent hours composing a scathing email, detailing every sacrifice, every midnight vigil during his illnesses, every expense I'd shouldered alone. My finger hovered over the send button before I finally closed the laptop without sending it. Attacking Jason's perspective wouldn't heal the rift between us. It would only widen it. By the third day, my anger had burned out, leaving space for genuine curiosity. I went to the local bookstore and found myself in the parenting section, then moved to psychology. I purchased books with titles like Toxic Parents, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and Breaking the Patterns of the Past. Reading them was excruciating but illuminating. I recognized myself in descriptions of well-meaning parents who, due to their own unresolved traumas or insecurities, end up controlling their children in ways that stifle independence. One passage particularly struck me. Children of controlling parents often struggle with decision-making, self-trust, and establishing healthy boundaries in adult relationships. They may seek therapy to untangle their own identity from their parents' expectations and develop the confidence to live authentically. I thought of Jason's indecision about his college major, his secretive enrollment in creative writing classes, his apparent difficulty standing up to me directly until the explosive wedding toast. Had my parenting created these struggles? The thought was almost unbearable. A week after the wedding, I called a therapist whose name I'd found in one of the books. Dr. Fiona Lambert specialized in family relationships and intergenerational trauma. I had to wait 2 weeks for an appointment, 2 weeks during which the silence from Jason continued. No thank you note for my wedding gift, a substantial check I could ill afford. No acknowledgement of my existence at all. My friends had different perspectives on the situation. Marge, who had helped watch Jason all those years ago, was firmly in my corner. That boy had no right to embarrass you like that. After everything you did for him. Patricia, a newer friend from my book club, offered a more nuanced view. It sounds like you both have valid feelings. You did your best in impossible circumstances, but he experienced your best in ways you didn't intend. The most unexpected insight came from my brother Mike, with whom I've never been particularly close. He called after hearing about the incident through family channels. "Ellie," he said, using my childhood nickname, "do you remember how Mom was after Dad died? Our father had passed away when I was 15, Mike 17. Our mother had been devastated, becoming hypervigilant about our safety, controlling our activities, constantly checking up on us. Remember how we couldn't go anywhere without 20 questions? How she'd use guilt to keep us close. After all I've been through, you want to go to that concert 3 hours away." I'd never made the connection before, but once Mike pointed it out, it seemed obvious. I'd replicated our mother's parenting style, born from the same place of fear and loss. The patterns had been passed down, unexamined and unhealed. 2 weeks after the wedding, I began drafting a letter to Jason. Not the angry screed I'd initially composed, but something more reflective. I acknowledged his feelings without dismissing them. I explained some of my motivations without using them as excuses. I apologized for specific instances where my fear had masked itself as control. I expressed hope that we might find a way forward, even if it looked different from what I'd imagined. I wrote draft after draft, refining my words, making sure I wasn't slipping into defensiveness or passive aggression. After nearly a week of revisions, I had a letter I felt represented my true heart. But I didn't send it immediately. Dr. Lambert suggested giving both Jason and myself more time, him to enjoy his honeymoon and newlywed period without this emotional weight, me to continue my own growth and healing rather than seeking immediate resolution. So I waited, continuing my therapy sessions, reading more books, joining an online support group for parents estranged from adult children. I learned I wasn't alone in my experience, that parent-child relationships are among the most complex human connections, capable of causing the deepest wounds and the most profound healing. A month passed. I heard through mutual connections that Jason and Rachel had returned from their honeymoon in Hawaii. Still no contact. I kept the letter in my desk drawer, revisiting it occasionally but resisting the urge to send it prematurely. Dr. Lambert encouraged me to focus on my own healing rather than fixating on reconciliation, advice that was difficult but necessary to follow. You cannot control how Jason responds to you, she reminded me gently. You can only control your own actions and reactions. The work you're doing now has value regardless of whether it leads to immediate reconciliation. 6 weeks after the wedding, I was gardening in my front yard when a familiar car pulled into my driveway. My heart lurched as Jason stepped out, alone, looking uncertain but determined. The moment I'd both longed for and dreaded had arrived, and all I could think was that I hadn't had time to change out of my dirt-stained gardening clothes or fix my hair. Then I laughed at myself. Here was another example of trying to control circumstances instead of simply being present in them. I stood wiping my hands on my jeans and waited for my son to approach, knowing that whatever happened next would change us both forever. Jason stopped a few feet away from me, hands in his pockets, his posture a mixture of defensiveness and uncertainty. He looked tired, I noticed, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from emotional rather than physical exertion. "Hi, Mom," he said finally. "Hello, Jason." I resisted the urge to rush forward and hug him, to pretend everything was fine. We were beyond such easy fixes now. "Would you like to come inside?" He nodded, following me into the house. In the kitchen, I washed my hands and offered him coffee, falling back on hospitality to ease the awkwardness between us. "Black, right?" I confirmed, remembering how he'd switched from cream and sugar during college. "Actually, I take it with almond milk now," he said. "But black is fine." Such a small thing, not knowing how my son took his coffee, yet it emphasized the distance between us. "I have regular milk," I offered. "Black is fine," he repeated, settling at the kitchen table where he'd done homework as a child. We sat across from each other, steam rising from our mugs, the ticking of the wall clock marking the painful silence. Finally Jason spoke. "I need to apologize for how I handled things at the wedding," he said carefully. "Not for what I said but for saying it there like that. It was inappropriate and hurtful." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for acknowledging that. It was difficult. Rachel's been pretty upset with me about it. She said I ambushed you and turned what should have been a celebration into a therapy session." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her exact words were emotional terrorism. "Rachel seems like someone who values kindness," I said, choosing my words with care. "She is." Jason twisted his coffee mug in his hands. "But she also agreed with the content of what I said, just not the delivery. We've talked a lot about family dynamics since the wedding, about patterns and how not to repeat them. This was the opening I needed. I've been doing some reading and reflection on that myself," I said. "And seeing a therapist." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're in therapy?" "For about a month now." I met his gaze directly. "Your toast forced me to confront some hard truths about my parenting, Jason. I've been learning about how my own fears and insecurities affected how I raised you." "I didn't think you'd ever admit that," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be honest with myself. It's not easy." I took a deep breath. "When your father left, I was terrified. Not just about money or logistics, but about failing you. I'd already lost my marriage, and I couldn't bear the thought of making mistakes with you too. So I controlled everything I could, thinking that would keep you safe and successful." "It made me feel like I could never measure up," Jason said. "Like my worth was tied to achievements, not to who I was." "I never meant to make you feel that way." My voice caught. I was so focused on external measures of success, because those were tangible. I could point to your grades or your college acceptance and tell myself I was doing a good job as a mother, while ignoring that I was anxious, unable to make decisions without overthinking them, and terrified of disappointing you. His words stung, but I forced myself to hear them. Yes, I acknowledged. I didn't see the emotional impact. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Jason looked out the window for a long moment. There's something else you should know. The therapy I mentioned. I've been going for years, not just recently. Since sophomore year of college. This revelation hit me hard. All those years, and I'd had no idea. What made you start then? I had a panic attack during finals week. Couldn't breathe, thought I was dying. The campus counselor helped me see that my anxiety was related to perfectionism and fear of failure. He looked back at me. Fear of disappointing you specifically. Tears filled my eyes. I'm so sorry, Jason. I know you are. Now, he sighed. But for years I was angry. Every time I tried to bring up how your expectations affected me, you'd remind me of all your sacrifices. It felt like I wasn't allowed to have negative feelings because you'd worked so hard. His words echoed passages from the books I'd been reading about emotional manipulation. Often unintentional but damaging nonetheless. You're right, I admitted. I used my sacrifices as a shield against criticism. That wasn't fair to you. Jason seemed surprised by my candor. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. No, it wasn't. But there's something else I've learned in therapy. You did the best you could with what you knew at the time. And some of what you taught me was valuable. I am disciplined and responsible. I do plan for the future. Those aren't bad qualities. But they need to be balanced with joy, spontaneity, and self-trust, I added, echoing concepts from my recent reading. He looked at me with new interest. That's exactly what my therapist says. We talked for hours that afternoon, covering ground we should have explored years ago. I learned about financial struggles I'd hidden from him to protect his childhood. He shared feelings and experiences he kept secret for fear of hurting or angering me. The conversation was painful at times but also liberating. For perhaps the first time we were seeing each other as complete human beings, not just through the distorted lens of our shared past. As afternoon turned to evening, Rachel texted asking when he'd be home. I should go, Jason said, standing. This is a lot to process. Of course. I walked him to the door, uncertain what happened next. Thank you for coming today. He hesitated, then asked, would it be okay if we continued this conversation? Maybe with Rachel sometime? She wants to understand our family dynamics better, especially now that we're thinking about starting our own family someday. The idea that Jason was considering parenthood despite his issues with my parenting filled me with unexpected hope. I'd like that very much. He nodded, then surprised me with a brief, awkward hug before leaving. It wasn't the warm embraces we'd shared when he was young, but it was a beginning. Over the next 6 months we established a new kind of relationship. We met for coffee every few weeks, sometimes with Rachel, sometimes just the two of us. We didn't always agree, old patterns occasionally reasserted themselves, but we were learning to communicate honestly without weaponizing the past. I continued my therapy, discovering how my own childhood had shaped my parenting approach. Jason and I established healthier boundaries. I learned to ask before offering advice. He practiced expressing his needs directly instead of withdrawing or exploding. 4 months after our first post-wedding conversation, Jason and Rachel invited me to dinner at their new home. Over dessert they shared their news. Rachel was pregnant. They'd been hesitant to tell me, unsure how I'd respond. I want to be involved in my grandchild's life, I told them, but I promise to respect your parenting decisions. I've learned some hard lessons about what not to do. Actually, Rachel said, exchanging a glance with Jason, we were hoping you might share some wisdom too. Not about control but about resilience. About raising a child to be strong even when life is difficult. You did that part well, Eleanor. Hearing my daughter-in-law acknowledge something positive about my parenting brought tears to my eyes. I would be honored, I said. In the months since then I've been working on a journal for my future grandchild. Not a book of advice, but stories about their father, about our journey together, about the mistakes and triumphs that shaped us both. I want this child to know that family relationships can bend without breaking, that forgiveness is possible even after deep hurt, and that love, however imperfectly expressed, can still be the foundation for healing. I've learned that parenting is the most humbling journey imaginable. We do our best with limited information. our own unhealed wounds, and overwhelming love that sometimes manifests in counterproductive ways. There are no perfect parents, only human ones, trying to raise children in an uncertain world. If you're struggling with family relationships, whether as a parent or a child, know that healing is possible. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to see beyond your own perspective. It means accepting that love alone isn't enough. It must be paired with respect, boundaries, and the humility to admit when you're wrong. Have you experienced a similar family conflict or reconciliation? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles is the first step toward healing. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more real-life experiences that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find peace in your own.